I think I might be on, I don't know, maybe number 25, maybe 30. I apologize you weren't in the top 25. We just should have gotten you in sooner, but I've been all the way to Stoughton Rotary, to Northeast Washington Rotary, to the coast, and also in downtown Seattle. So glad to finally be making it to you guys.
Excellent, excellent. This was kind of an easy request for me. I'm the operations chief for North County Fire, and we actively deploy on wildland incidents in state and out of state. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this today. So I have a short bio that I'll read on you. Unfortunately, you didn't. My audience here doesn't get to see the lovely portrait that accompanied that. But elected in 2016, Commissioner of Public Lands, Hillary Franz protects and manages nearly 6 million acres of public lands in Washington State, from coastal waters to and aquatic reserves to working forests and farms to commercial developments and recreation areas. Commissioner Franz is committed to ensuring our public lands are healthy, productive, both today and for the future generations. She is leading the push to make Washington's lands resilient in the face of climate change, investing in carbon sequestration and clean energy with wind, solar, and geothermal infrastructure. As the leader of the state's largest wildfire fighting force, she has pushed for new strategies, innovations, and resources to protect our communities. In order to restore wildland resilience in our forests, Commissioner Franz developed a 20-year forest health strategic plan. This plan will make more than 1 million acres of forest healthier and more resilient to wildfires, a scale and pace that is unprecedented. And she has prioritized investments in our rural communities, allocated millions of dollars for spark economic activities in struggling communities. She knows that our working lands and the communities that depend on them for family wage jobs are integral in our success and as a state, and as she invests in their success. Hillary is a third-generation farmer and small forest landowner and has raised 3 wonderful boys. She holds a bachelor's degree from Smith College and a Juris Doctor from Northeastern University Law. Hope I didn't make any mistakes there.
You did great.
Thank you. I would love to kind of hear from you about just Washington wildfires and kind of, as growing up and looking back, we didn't have fires like we do today. So is it global warming? Is it just the changes in logging? Arlington historically was very much a logging town, and we're not so much anymore. So is it that we're not harvesting the timber out of the forest? Is it all those things? So love to hear more.
Okay. Well, let me first start to give a broad overview of the Department of Natural Resources that I lead, because most people aren't even aware of the full breadth of the work. First, thank you, Paul, for that great introduction. I wish I could be there and see everyone, but thanks for the opportunity to be able to connect with all of you, and I look forward to when we can all be in person. So I'm first give you a broad overview of the Department of Natural Resources that I lead. Usually there's always some surprises in there for people, and then I will talk about wildfire and forest health and community resilience, which has been sort of very much the sort of topic du jour, especially this year and last year. And thank you, Paul, for your service. Really grateful for that. So I oversee the Department of Natural Resources. It's basically 6 agencies. First, we oversee 2.6 million acres of aquatic land. So think your entire coast, your rivers, your lakes, and your streams. We have a proprietary role where we have leases with ports, marinas, shellfish aquaculture. We're actually the largest geoduck producer in the country. And the money we generate from those leases goes to salmon habitat restoration and public access to our waterways. I then oversee 3 million acres of upland. So these are the lands that are above water, and I don't mean just financially, but literally above water. 2 million acres of forest land, 1 million acres of agricultural land. We're actually the largest wheat producer in the state. We're becoming the largest vineyard producer. And then also have about 10,000 plus commercial, industrial, residential properties. In fact, we just recently purchased a property in Arlington, a Bartell's store there. The money that we generate from these properties goes to funding our schools, K through 12, community college, technical college, University of Washington, and Wazoo, about 125 million a biennium. And then about 200 million goes to fund the counties, basic health, housing, human services, library, public safety. In some counties, like King County, we're about 0.08% of their operating budget. They have a very large, diverse budget given their economic base. But in many communities, and counties were about 40% of their entire operating budget. So you can see how critical it is that we're managing and stewarding these lands, not just for present generation, but for future generations. In addition to that, I oversee the second largest amount of recreation land, something you're very familiar there where you are, second only to the federal government. So we have everything from cross-country skiing and downhill skiing to mountain biking, hiking, horseback riding, and even scuba diving. I oversee Washington State Wildfire, which we'll talk more about, and I'll get to Paul's question. And then if that wasn't enough, I oversee Washington State Geology. So think about everything that happens underneath the surface of the earth. Washington State is a very volatile state, and I don't mean just politically. It is volatile underneath the surface with the threat of 5 live volcanoes, the threat of the big earthquake, tsunami, landslides, which you're familiar with in your community. We do all of the education and data, trying to get information out to local and state government agencies and communities about the threats and risks involved with just natural disasters that come from the volatility of what happens under the surface. So more and more, much of my job has been very much focused on the issues around wildfires. We're seeing increasing number of wildfires throughout our state. Year after year. 6 of the last 7 years have been significant wildfire seasons. This year was no stranger to it. This year we had over 1,750 fires, over 640,000 acres burned. We've been fighting fires as early as March, and fortunately our season is starting to come to an end as we see cooler temperatures and moisture. But given the drought that our state suffered this year, where our landscape was bone dry, like much of the Western United States, we have been fighting fire since July 1, frankly, with no break, where we had over 15 to 17 significant fires on the landscape at any given time. Those fires have largely been on the eastern part of the state, but we're seeing more year after year, where about 30% of our fires are now on the west side of the state. A majority of our fires are human caused, about 90%. We're seeing an increase in debris pile burns. But in addition to that, we have been making a significant push to get at this crisis. First, in wildfire response. When I came to this agency, we had about 7 helicopters to fight fires all over the state. All 7 of them fought in the Vietnam War. They have the bullet holes to show for it. For those who are watching, how many of you are still driving the same car from the Vietnam War era? Paul, I know you weren't driving at that time, but if there's others, how many of you were driving the same car from the Vietnam War era? Yep, not very many people, right? But we put our pilots up in these machines, and fortunately we have amazing mechanics that make them run very well, but they're outdated. And they're also too few for the amount of fires that we are fighting on the landscape in any given year. So we've been making a push for more resources, more air resources, and more firefighters. Air resources are absolutely critical on initial attack. You know, you might have heard on the news over the last 2 months about maybe 10 fires. About 25 plus fires were significant and were consistently on the landscape, and our firefighters, they grew to thousands of acres, in some cases 50,000 acres. But there's also around 1,725 fires you never heard of. And it's because we kept 93% of our fires below 10 acres. And it started with the air resources, that the moment we see smoke in the air, we're putting our aircraft up and we're getting them on top of those fires quickly and containing them so they can move on to the next one. The challenge is we've had too few. So I've been pushing for more air resources. We've also been pushing for more firefighters. When I came into this role after the 2014 through 2016 fires, where 1 million acres burned in 2015 alone, we had about 40 full-time firefighters. That's it, to cover the entire state and to cover fires that were starting in March, going all the way to October. We have been pushing for more resources at the state level for firefighters, and also for more resources at the local level, as our local fire districts are often first on the line, able to get to those fires quickly and help contain them while other resources come in from state and federal agencies. We fortunately have, as we've been pushing for more resources in wildfire response, we are also recognizing that we can't keep running from one fire to the next. We can't keep being in a reactive state. Too often government waits until we're in the midst of a crisis before it does anything, whether it's mental health, whether it's housing, and similar has been true for wildfire. So we have been working to try to get at the root of the issue, which is that we have a forest health crisis in Washington state. In Eastern Washington alone, we have about 2.7 million acres of forest that are already dead and dying. More than half of that is federal land, then private land, state, and tribal. We developed a 20-year forest health plan. It was within the first 8 months of me being in this position that has set a goal that we will restore 1.25 million acres of forest over the next 20 years. Now, at the state level, we've been doing a phenomenal job. I've actually told my team we have to be accelerating this work and working, frankly, trying to move at the pace and scale of wildfire. And so we have actually doubled down. We're going to reach our state goal of restoring the health of our state lands within 10 years versus 20. Much of the work we have that is going to be significant is getting on our federal lands to be able to make sure that they're not going up in flames. And I know you guys sit at sort of the foothills of some federal lands that are at risk. We are seeing increasing dying off of our forests on the west side of the state as well. It is not at the significant level that Eastern Washington, but we are seeing it. And that is why we're seeing more increasing fires over here on the west side. Specifically, and Paul's question was really, is it climate change? Is it forest management? Too oftentimes we have politicians, I would say, who like to spend much of their time doing their work in headlines versus actually understanding what needs to happen on the ground. The reality is it's both. We are seeing increasing change in our climate. We're seeing hotter, drying temperatures like we saw this year and we've seen in previous years, where warming comes in much earlier in the year, dries out the landscape on both sides of the Cascades, and carries that through well into fall. In addition to that hotter temperatures, we have for too long not managed our forests for that changing climate, but also for the long-term health. Fire is natural within our forest. What isn't natural is how much fuel we actually have out there. Historically, fire would naturally come through an area and it would remove the dead, weak trees. It'd remove the smaller diameter, create more space between trees, and allow healthier trees to get healthier, because healthy trees can withstand fire if there isn't such a significant amount of fuel on that landscape. So what we've been doing is specifically setting forth the kind of what treatments need to happen on the landscape. We're agnostic to property lines because fire and disease does not follow property lines. Specifically setting out the level of treatment, how many trees per acre should be there, getting back to sort of the natural landscape that used to be 50 plus years ago, removing that dead and dying disease trees, removing the smaller diameter, creating more space so that healthy trees aren't competing with weaker trees for the moisture and the nutrients they need to get strong. We'll oftentimes then bring prescribed fire into that landscape. Fire is healthy for that landscape as long as there is not the intense fuel load on it. And to date, in the last 4 years, we've already reached a quarter of our goal, having treated over 300,000 acres, a significant increase from where we were between 2005 and 2012. Our agency treated 30,000 acres in 7 years. So 300,000 acres in 4 years is a significant increase. We've also signed an agreement with the federal government that enables us to do projects on federal land. Since we already have boots on the ground, we can go in and do it much quicker and more efficiently. And it's helping accelerate. There are still significant challenges in trying to get for the federal agencies to be able to move more aggressively. And part of the effort we've been doing is trying to push at the federal level to be able to restore those forests. If you actually tracked the significant catastrophic fires this year, as well as previous years, from Southern California up to the northern point of Washington, and you just drew a line between the major fires, you pretty much follow the path of all of our federal forests. The great thing is when we did this forest health plan and we specifically set out what kind of treatments need to happen and the pace and scale we were going to work, we are now seeing whole new innovative industries coming into Washington State and setting up business, which means more jobs, especially stronger economies in our rural areas that have been struggling in many cases with 7 to 10% unemployment. We've had new facilities of cross-laminated timber open up based on they knew they would have supply of the smaller diameter. These are cross-laminated timber now takes small diameter and even dead disease trees and can build taller buildings and more affordable buildings, like 18-story buildings in BC and Portland, Oregon. And that new technology will now be accelerating here in Washington State. We're also been moving biochar and a new biochar pilot that'll happen in Okanagan, which will take waste material and can actually turn it into a soil nutrient for agriculture, forestry, and even stormwater. And we're also exploring biomass for pellet and other type of industries for the opportunity to take what I say is an environmental challenge and our economic challenge in our rural communities to create new opportunities to help save our evergreen state from turning charcoal black and help our rural communities, especially with their economies and their community development. The great thing is this last year, we were able to secure the largest investment in wildfire response, forest restoration, and community resilience in Washington State's history with a unanimous vote in the House and the Senate. And I have to say unanimous. When have we ever been able to say unanimous in politics in a really long time? It just shows the work that's being done between the wildfire strategic plan that we developed in the last 3 years, the forest health plan that shows we can truly change the trajectory on if we start making the investments, both in having the resources to get on these fires quickly and be able to restore the health of these landscapes and help communities become more resilient. Communities like Malden, where we saw tragically last year, in 2 to 3 hours, that entire community, 80% of its buildings were burned to the ground. But amongst all that destruction, there were homes that were completely untouched. So we are feeling, what I would say is we're feeling extremely exhausted. It has been a long, long fire season. We're finally starting to get a break fortunately in the weather, and that is helping reduce the number of fires and also help us get on top of the last remaining few. And we're also feeling some optimism and encouragement as we finally are seeing investments in the areas that are needed for wildfire issues. I could go on to other things. I'm happy to keep on going questions, but everything from economic development to community development to any question you have, I'm here to answer.
First, let me correct you. Dave Kraske was the one that introduced you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize on the screen. I'm so sorry, Dave. It says Paul. And so this is the problem with Zoom. I missed your identification. So I apologize for that. There's 2 rooms there.
First of all, how amazing are you? I'd love to see what your resume looks like. You'd mentioned a huge number that are man-made. Can you speak to punitive action or responsibility when a fire is intentionally or unintentionally set by a human that's identified?
Yeah, and first I would say let me just say the majority of and I don't have graphs and I'm not doing a PowerPoint right now for you guys, but if we looked at sort of the growth in fires, we see first a growth in human caused fires. We specifically see a doubling in numbers of debris pile fires. And I think what's happening is people, especially during COVID, were getting outside, getting in on their landscape and cleaning it up, right? They had more time at home. What they might not have been aware of is how hot and dry. I mean, we used to be able to do debris pile burns in March and April, and we had enough moisture, especially on the west side of the state. Unfortunately, we're getting sort of almost summertime temperatures in March and April with very little moisture, and it means people aren't aware of that changes. When there's a fire that's human caused, we actually do an investigation first on every fire. What is the cause? And then we will track down the source of that fire as best as possible. Some are easy to track, like a debris pile. If it's coming from a home, we can see where its source is. Oftentimes we will have chains dragging on trucks driving up I-5 and other highways, creates a spark with that change. chain that jumps over to the side of the road. And now we have a pretty significant grass on fire or forest fire, depending on the location. You could drive up I-5 just, today and see a number of burns that have happened out on either side of the freeway. And that happens throughout our state. It's a little harder for us to track those kind of sources. Others are utility infrastructure. We're working with utility from our PUDs to PSC and Avista on how do we make sure that the infrastructure, their transmission lines, don't have risk of trees falling on them. Everybody's probably very familiar with the Dixie Fire down in California, which has become one of the worst wildfires in US history. That fire was caused by PG&E. So we will track those and we do our best to be able to hold them accountable, and they have to pay for it. And it can be quite costly. We have fires who cost anywhere between $60 to $80 million alone.
Any other questions?
Commissioner Franz, how has COVID affected deployment for wildfire crews? We had crews that deployed all summer in state and out of state, actually to the Dixie Fire and down in Southeast Oregon. And that was one concern we had as crews. Fire camps can be very close quarters. For most of these folks don't know, but the last fire I was on was in Okanagan, and we were at the Okanagan Fairgrounds tenting. I mean, hundreds of tents in the fairgrounds. They bring in semi-trailers that are shower facilities, and Department of Corrections comes in and does the cooking. It is very close quarters. So is that affected deployments?
Yeah, and thank you again. And thanks again for your service. I know it's long, hot, and challenging work, and I appreciate it to you and your team. So we, last year when COVID first came, we were very, very concerned. Our firefighters, like you said, are in very close quarters. They're used to getting what's called Camp Crud, where they're in such close quarters and they're exhausted and tired, and it's easy for the flu or other type of illnesses to pass quickly. So we were very concerned about COVID when it started last year, and we were literally trying to write the manual with our federal agencies and partners and local fire districts about how do we keep our men and women safe. On the fire line, as you know, you don't have the ability to wear masks. You're within 6 feet of each other easily. You get in the engines, putting those masks on are uncomfortable, but we enforce a mask and really we take safety as paramount. The challenge that we faced this year, as we're seeing the Delta variant is spreading much quicker, is last year while we had only 3 people contract COVID, 2 people before they even reported for duty, they were seasonal firefighters. Another one contracted it, but before they even made it really to the camp. So we were able to prevent the spread. And many of our firefighters are operating in 10 to 20 member crews that they're literally spending all their time with. So you can see how it quickly spreads. And if one is test positive, we have to then sit the entire rest of the crew out. This year, the numbers have been through the roof, to be honest. And the last 4 weeks have been some of the worst numbers of coming. We've had to actually send crews away, federal and tribal teams coming in from other states to help out, other local fire districts from other states. We've had a number where 1 or 2 of them tested positive. We had to send them all away, which is very, very difficult because especially during the heart of the season, July and August this year, we needed way more resources than we had because so many firefighters were deployed in Washington, Oregon, and California, and there frankly wasn't enough. So we have struggled, and as you probably have heard, I had to take pretty significant steps to require mandatory vaccinations. We also began making a move of bringing the vaccines to the camps to make it easier for firefighters to get vaccinated. Not an easy choice, as we know it's one that there's a lot of debate out there, but at the end of the day, my #1 responsibility is to keep my firefighters safe, whether it's from fire or from a deadly pandemic.
So I have a question. How do you keep it safe from the smoke? All of us that are around here, and we've seen smoke even coming into Western Washington. I don't know how the firefighters can keep safe.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that I think is very, very challenging, is that unlike structural firefighting, where they wear a significant amount of equipment that helps keep the air they're breathing far more clean, the reality is out on the fire line, they don't have much protection. And it's something that they are breathing that smoke in for months on end. Many of our firefighters, when they're finished being deployed here in Washington State on fires, will go to other ones, whether it's California or whether it's Australia. So they're doing this work for months throughout the year, and there is very little protection. I think it's an area where we need to start looking at technology. But as Dave will tell you, it's not that easy when you're out there in a wildland fire to wear sort of equipment that prevents you from breathing that smoke. And I'll just say, I think the number one, there's two things that I always tell the public, because I think oftentimes our public sort of feels that there's nothing they can do when fires are upon them, whether it's at their door or whether it's in the community or whether it's across the mountain. The reality is, with 90% of our fires caused by humans, each one of us could be part of this fire team by preventing them happening in the first place and helping educate others about how these fires get started and to take actions. Addition to that is we have 2 million homes that are at risk of wildfire. That number is growing as we're seeing increasing stress on our forests with hotter, drier temperatures. It's also increasing as we see more and more people moving into our wildland urban interface. Many of our firefighters who are structural firefighters we're having to do crossovers where they're literally trying to protect structures within a wildland area as the expansion of wildland fires have been increasing. And many people may remember the fire in Bothell. Bothell doesn't look that much different than Arlington. And the community of Bothell faced significant fires last year and this year, maybe not as significant as what was experienced in Okanagan of the 50,000 acres, but significant given the size of the population. And people who are living in that wildland urban interface can take steps to create defensible space around their homes, that 6 to 10 feet of making sure their lawn is green, making sure they don't have trees up against their house, cleaning out their gutters, taking steps. And we have information on our website that will help. And it goes a long way. As I always say, we've all learned how to create 6 feet of defensible space around our bodies to protect ourselves, our families, our neighbors, our communities, and our first responders. We need to now do the same thing around our homes, create that defensible space. It'll help your own family, help your neighbor. It will also save firefighters' lives as they're trying to help protect you and your home.
Commissioner Franz, thank you for taking the time to chat with us today. I am kind of in awe of how thorough you know your information, where you can just talk and just eloquently and articulately go through all these important things that have to be thought about and we take for granted. So thank you for your service for the state and all the good changes that you've done. And thanks again for taking the time to meet with us. Any other last words before we let you go back to the busy work that you have?
I'll just say, so burn ban's going to be lifted soon, but don't be silly. Don't start any fires. Be one less spark out there. Our firefighters are exhausted and tired. They'd like to go home and have a easy rest of the year. And then I look forward to working, and we didn't talk much about economic development and community development, but look forward to coming back and maybe when it's a little quieter with fires and talk more about that and the opportunities for partnering with you and your community.
Sounds great. Thank you again.
Thanks. All right. Be safe, everyone.